Hi, and welcome to another edition of TVSet. Today is March 17th, 2013. Today we're going to be talking about the issues of genetically modified organisms and how some farmers down in central or west central Oregon have been dealing with that and trying to take care of those issues that are surrounding by that. So our guest tonight is Clinton Lindsey.
Hi, Jeff.
Hi, Clint. So why don't you tell us a little bit about you and what's going on down there in the Corvallis area?
Yeah, I'm from Corvallis. I work for an organic grain farm, and I'm also co-founder and steering committee member of the Benton County Community Rights Coalition. And we're engaged in a process to try to get a piece of legislation on the ballot that would, among other things, ban GMO agriculture in Benton County. And this has been something that we've been working on for a little over a year now. But yeah, I'm basically in the group of farmers and citizens who are just really concerned about GMOs and the companies that bring them in. So we're trying to do something about it.
Okay.
So are there other counties that have had success in banning GMOs?
Not in Oregon. I know Mendocino County in California passed a piece of legislation that banned GMOs, but not in Oregon. This would be the first time.
Okay, so you guys are in touch with them about what their experiences were, and
well, no, we're going about it a little differently. They passed what we call just a straight up ban, which doesn't include any community rights based language. Ours is different because we're coming at it from a community rights perspective, which means that as part of the ordinance wording, we're elevating the rights of the citizens to decide what their food system will look like above the rights of corporations, which have all these powers and tools at their disposal to squash what we call straight up bans.
Power to the people.
That's right.
All right.
So in a sense, you're plowing new territory.
Yeah, in Oregon we sure are. And this is something that's been done across the country. Over, I think, 150 communities now have passed community rights ordinances. The work is based on CELDEF, the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund. They're the ones that really pioneered the community rights approach, and that's how we got started.
And they're using this process in other communities to help out with deals with fracking. And help me out, what are some of the other issues?
Factory farming, water
extractions.
Right.
So for example, Pepsi or Coca-Cola will come in and their water bottling division will say, we're going to buy the rights to all the water, like say in the Trinity Shasta County area of Northern California, and they suck the aquifer dry up there, and then all the farmers and the
right, and then the local citizens are out of luck.
Out of luck.
Yeah. So that was one of the things that they did, and yeah, of course the factory farming. There was a hog farm at some township in Pennsylvania. I can't remember the name, but it was a very small hog farming community, and a very large industrial hog operation wanted to come in, and they used community rights ordinance to ban that from happening.
And how big was this hog operation we're talking about?
Oh, 10,000 head plus. I mean, I don't know the numbers, but huge. You know,
huge.
Much different than what had been going on in that community up till then. So it would have changed the face of the farming system in that community.
Okay. So if we can go ahead and go with Roland number 1, that Roland would give a real good, concise overview, and then we can talk about it from that point on.
This the last day or two?
About 3 days ago I sprayed this. These are Roundup Ready sugar beets. I've discovered I got a problem out here, and that is
These are not dying.
This is a new weed for us. What that is that's Roundup Ready canola. And Roundup Ready canola isn't growing anywhere in this region. In the springtime we have huge flocks of geese that land in these fields as they're coming out of Canada in the fall, and then of course in the spring, you know, they come back. But I think in the fall, when they're coming from Canada,
fed on the canola up there.
They're eating canola up in Canada.
Passing through them and then dropped here on the...
Yep. There's nothing that kills this out of sugar beets, and so I called Monsanto and asked them what I could do about it. They told me hand labor was the only way to get rid of it. You probably don't know about this yet over in Europe, but Monsanto actually was granted a patent on tank mixing. It's just the process of mixing chemicals together. They know that we're going to have these problems, and they know it's going to take tank mixes of other chemicals with Roundup to control this sort of a problem. And also, of course, you know, our weeds are becoming resistant to Roundup, so we're having to tank mix other chemicals in to control those problem weeds. We've just relied too heavily on Roundup is what's happened, and everybody's been using it in every crop, and the weeds are really quickly adapting and becoming immune. When Roundup Ready crops started to get introduced here back in the mid-90s, as far back as the early 90s, most of these chemical companies stopped putting research into developing new conventional herbicides because they thought everything's going to be Roundup ready. There won't be a market for this stuff. We're not going to put any money into development. So here we are, you know, 25 years later, and roughly, and we've got this problem. We don't have any herbicides to control some of these weeds, and we're relying on Roundup, and we're starting to have a real mess. The last years that I was growing conventional soybeans, I was trying to grow for Japan, and we were exporting them over there, and they wanted to have pure non-GMO soybeans. And what happened was our beans kept becoming more and more contaminated. And it was getting down to the point where about 50% of our loads were being rejected because of contamination. And we couldn't buy seed that was pure without contamination. The seed company told us straight up, this stuff's going to have some contamination in it.
Yep.
And and on top of that, the conventional seed no longer was cheap. The seed companies, because the Roundup Ready seed was 5 or 6 times as much money, they simply hiked the price on their conventional seed, and then when they sold you the seed, it came with the clause that even though it's conventional, it's not patented, you couldn't save and replant it. So we were back to paying the high price for the conventional seed. We couldn't sell it into the Japanese market for a premium. We were putting then more expensive conventional herbicides on it. It was a losing proposition. We didn't have any choice but to go back and start planting Roundup Ready crops. There was no choice. That was the only choice.
You're trapped into a pattern that you can't get out of.
Right. So now we're growing soybeans that instead of paying $6 or $7 or $8 a bushel for seed, we're paying in the $50 to $60 a bushel for the seed.
What would you recommend to me as a UK farmer and to other European farmers? Should we go down the route of genetically modified crops, or is it something you think we should avoid doing?
Well, I would say, you know, at all costs, avoid doing it.
At all costs, avoid doing it.
Exactly. 25 years.
Well,
So
96.
genetically modified 96.
Yeah, GMO
Okay,
soybeans
so it
came out in
hasn't-
96. So yeah, it's been a long time, and
Yeah.
they quickly take over the market, you know. And the company that makes the seed also makes the chemicals that spray on the seed, so they win at both ends.
Right.
But the farmer in the video mentioned that he felt trapped.
Yes.
You know, he had fewer and fewer choices. They back you into a corner until you're completely dependent on the company for the seed, for the chemicals. And if you want to get out, sometimes you can't. You're stuck, you know, whether or not you signed a technology agreement, you know. So that's one of the dangers. I mean, these guys are getting backed into a corner.
So why don't you explain the technology agreement?
When you want to purchase Roundup Ready seed from Monsanto, or when you want to purchase a GMO seed from a company like Monsanto or Syngenta or whoever, they make you sign a technology agreement that says, here are the rules that you have to abide by if you use our seed. One of those is you can't replant the seed. You can't save any seed. You have to buy the seed every year, which flies in the face of standard agricultural practices for millennia. If you have any seed lots that are found to have their patented seed in them and you try to sell them, they can sue you for patent infringement. So you're signing a document that basically says now Monsanto owns your crop, and any misuse of that crop makes you liable for patent infringement and huge damages. So a lot of farmers will do it because they feel it's a good economic move, but then as you see in that video, they regret it later because they find themselves with fewer and fewer options until now they're just an out.
You just or in the film it mentioned that non-GMO seed is going to be contaminated, so no farmer can plant any seed without the threat of being sued by Monsanto.
That's right. I mean, it's
Any seed.
Right. It's harder and harder to find uncontaminated conventional varieties of all the major commodity crops. I mean, as soon as they became GMO, your options became more limited, and now it's almost impossible to find uncontaminated varieties of a lot of these major commodity crops, whether it's corn or soy or whatever. It's difficult to find those varieties, like that farmer said. So again, you find yourself going right back to the GMOs again.
But there must have been some advantage to the GMOs.
For the GMO companies.
For the companies.
Yeah, I mean.
But not for the farmer.
Well, initially they said, if you use this seed, you can have bigger yields, you'll use less chemicals, it's the wave of the future, we'll feed the world. And some farmers, I'm sure a lot of farmers found that, hey, this is great, look at these clean fields, I don't have a single weed, wow, this is awesome. But like that farmer just said, he starts getting Roundup resistant weeds, super weeds, so now he can't just use Roundup anymore. Now he has to buy more chemicals, which cost even more money, more poisons being dumped in the ground because they don't work anymore. So it may work initially, but long term, it's even more dangerous. So their argument doesn't hold any water.
So with this vendor lock-in, have you had, how many, has there been groups of farmers saying we want to get out of this? And what type of luck have they had?
Well, in the valley, the biggest GMO crop is sugar beets. And back in, I think it was '06, the two big sugar beet companies in the valley, West Coast and Beta, said, we're bringing in GMO sugar beets now. And they said to the growers, either get on board or get out of the business. And within 3 years, over 90% of all the sugar beets grown in the valley were genetically modified. So they weren't even given a choice. And they made this call without informing the growers that are part of the Specialty Seed Association, the guys who are the guardians of the rules of making sure that the seed, the vegetable seed and other specialty seeds grown in the valley remain pure. They didn't tell them until after they'd planted it. Okay, and then they said, hey, we've got this new technology and this is what we're doing now. You need to do this if you want this business.
Why don't you go into some of the uniqueness of the specialty seed and the seed that's, or the crop that's grown for seed, the differences between that and the stuff that's grown for food consumption?
Sure. Well, I should probably say first, one of the things that's nice about Oregon, we have this amazing growing climate in the valley for growing such a wide variety of plants for seed, not just for fresh market produce, but seed to ship out all over the world so other people can have vegetables too. And so there's an association that was formed, the Willamette Valley Specialty Seed Association, that all their member growers abide by a pinning system, which has, if you have seniority, you get first dibs on a given plot. And if you plant a brassica, then anyone within the exclusion zone around that, I believe it's 3 miles, it depends on the crop. Nobody else can plant a brassica that can cross with that plant within that circle. So they did that to protect themselves and their customers so they could have pure seed. And their markets are absolutely reliant on the pure seed. So anything that comes in that threatens their seed purity with contamination of any kind, GMO or otherwise, and they're up in arms, you know, because that threatens the very core of their business.
So what did GMOs do to the purity of the seed stock?
Well, like the farmer in the video said, you immediately, if you're contaminated by GMOs, you immediately lose the ability to sell in Japan or the EU, both of whom do not allow the import of genetically modified seeds for food. So right there, you're losing two extremely lucrative markets. So your options are narrowed. So that's one of the biggest reasons. They don't want GMO contamination because it shuts them out of overseas markets. But also, it puts you at risk of being sued for patent infringement. If somebody comes on if Monsanto sends an inspector, finds out you've been selling some seed that's contaminated and carries their patented genes, you could be liable.
And you could be sued even though a goose or some geese flew over your field and their droppings dropped in there and they couldn't get out what they would consider weed in time before it went to seed.
Potentially.
Potentially.
Yeah, if you harvest a crop and you didn't know that there was some volunteer GMO plants in there that came from wherever, if it was pollen drift or dropped by a goose or whatever. If you go try to sell that and somebody tests it and it's found to be contaminated, then you're in big trouble.
Okay.
And so why does Europe not allow GMO seeds?
Because they've got they're more forward thinking than we are. They got you know their heads in the right place. They understand some of the risks that these pose. They didn't just dive right in with both feet like we did here. They're more cautious because there isn't enough, or at the time there wasn't enough science to back up. Hey, this is fully safe for human consumption. So they opted for the more cautious route.
And you said you had a study that was done in Europe.
I do, and surprisingly, there's been very few studies done in the United States.
Certainly no long-term
health
effects, right?
Of this.
Yeah, basically I have some results from 2 studies. One was done like from 2005 to 2007, and it was basically kind of a single or maybe 1 or 2 generation studies. So if we can bring up slide or image number 1, in this particular study, this was the mortality of rat pups on the first generation.
It should be said that this study was done by the European Food Safety Agency and not a U.S. agency, I believe. Is that correct? Just
correct.
Recently came out. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think this one's the European Food Safety, but I think this is.
You're getting this one.
Okay. Well, anyways, what we have here in this country is kind of finger pointing, as this slide shows right there. You can. I mean, it's so classic.
Right, and the problem there is that the FDA, Monsanto, USDA, there's this what they call the revolving door. Yeah, the higher ups in Monsanto frequently make it into positions of power in the USDA and FDA, and then they call the shots as to what is safe and what isn't.
It's kind of like the fox guarding the hen house.
Fox guarding the hen house.
Yeah. If we could switch to slide number 2.
That would be 01, right?
Well, 0. Yeah, this 01. Now let's go to slide number 02, which would be the next one in line. And this shows the mortality on the first day of rat mortality. I think this is the Irma Escalova study. And basically, scientists noted that baby rats or rats fed GMO diets developed at slower rates, had lower birth weights, looked markedly different than those fed non-GMO diets. And also the high mortality. You're looking at a 50% mortality on the first day of rat pups.
That's scary.
Yeah, 50%, as where the control group, the mortality was less than 10%.
And I think this study confirmed what a lot of people suspected, but there was such a big push from the industry to get these things pushed through that here we are 15, 16 years later.
We're still arguing the same thing.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like the tobacco industry.
Yes. So if you go to the next slide real quick, which would be slide 03, this is at 9 days, and you can see the difference between baby rats with mothers fed GMO and non-GMO. The top right is the one fed non-GMO soy, and the bottom left is the ones fed GMO soy. Marked difference in vigor, vitality, and also in mortality too. Then if we go to the next one, 04, this one is at 19 days, and you can see the dramatic differences. The smaller rat is the rat fed the GMO diet, and then the larger rat is the from the control group for the non-GMO diet.
So in the show later, will we be talking about how consumers might identify what their risk? Okay, but I'll wait, but I just want to make sure.
So why have we not heard about these studies?
Yeah,
that's a good question. And that, well, it's one reason why we're talking about it today is why have we not heard about it? And I guess
it does beg the question, why were they in such a huge hurry to get this stuff approved, to push it through? I mean, what is really their agenda? Is it, are they really trying to help feed the world? And if so, I mean, they've got a lot of skeletons in their closet that they prefer didn't come out.
They got a lot of splaining to do.
Exactly. I mean, it does beg the question. So, I mean, I believe that they are trying to control the food supply through whatever means possible. You control the seed, you control the food.
So this previous, just to make sure I got this straight, in our previous slide, there are 19-day-old rats, and there's a big rat and a little rat. And are you telling me that the little rat is the GMO rat?
It's a GMO rat.
Okay, all right.
This is loaded with rats. No, I'm just kidding.
Okay. Wow.
But what's interesting is most Americans, over 91% of Americans says we want labeling on our GMO food. We want to know what's in the food.
And what's GMO and what's
not GMO.
And the arguments against just seem ludicrous to me, that it would, the farmers would bear the cost, and that the labeling is just too expensive. And I mean, that's just ridiculous to me that they think it would be that expensive.
We have to ask ourselves if we live in a democracy or not. If 90% want labeling, and we don't get it, you know.
They label in China. They label in Russia. No.
They label in China, they label in Russia.
That's right.
Europe doesn't have GMO.
Well, it should be said that Europe's laws are kind of funny. They do have now what's this threshold, because they found for seed for their animal feed in particular that they couldn't get non-GMO animal feed. So they had to change their allowable threshold of genetic contamination so that they could allow more feed in, because they didn't have enough feed in the world to import into Europe to feed all their animals, so they had to change their rules.
But they're not feeding humans.
That's right.
Okay.
Interesting.
If directly.
Yeah, but those animals are feeding humans.
Right.
Yeah.
If we could switch to the last slide.
Well, the European Food Safety Agency just did a study that I believe was the first one done over the entire lifespan of the test animals. Most of the tests up until then had been, I think, short-term, 30-day, 90-day, And so they were considered to be, you know, fundamentally flawed. Like, this isn't telling enough. None of these results are really giving us a clear picture of what the health effects would be long term. So when this came out, it kind of blew people's hair back a bit. I mean, and then you had this instant reaction from the biotech industry that said it was flawed science and all this. Yeah. So, but this is confirming what a lot of us believed all along.
So how old are these rats?
Well,
if they're more than 90 days?
I had heard these were like second generation rats too.
Oh.
So are we looking at tumors here?
We're looking at massive tumors all over their bodies,
Mm-hmm.
and their lifespan was cut almost in half. Mm-hmm. If I remember the study correctly.
This should be a subject of discussion.
And the fact that it's not big news in America gives me pause.
I mean, where is freedom of the press? Where is our First Amendment?
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Why are we not talking about this?
This is serious stuff. I mean, even if you just love rats.
Yes.
But
Where are the rat lovers?
but if you love humans, you know.
Yes.
Well, this doesn't bode well for humans.
No.
This is,
And we've been eating GMOs for years. And you know, virtually all the processed food on the supermarket shelves has GMOs in it somewhere. I mean, all this GMO corn that's made into all these food additives, GMO soy for soybean oil is in so many foods. I mean, we are inundated with GMO contaminated food.
and even that organic soybean milk or soy milk has probably got GMO soy in it.
If they do third-party GMO testing, they can guarantee that it doesn't. But one of the rules of being certified organic is that you don't use genetically modified organisms. But depending on the seed, that isn't always a guarantee.
I was going to say, how it looks like the contamination is becoming so widespread. Is it now going to become, well, we can't say it's non-GMO, but we can say it only reaches so much of a threshold?
Again, it depends on the crop. Some are high risk, like soy. Others, you can say it's certified organic and be assured that there is no possibility of GMO contamination.
Okay, I wanted to make sure I heard you right. So you said in order for something to be certified organic, and then did I continue on with that sentence again?
You can't use GMO seed or products. I mean, you're not allowed to use those and maintain your organic certification.
Okay, so if somebody has GMO or has organic milk they're selling, does that imply that the cattle were fed on
a non-GMO diet? Right. And there's a dairy farmer I know from Polk County who is a member of Organic Valley Co-op. And I was talking with him about the issue because they're under immense pressure now because of GMO alfalfa, which is a major feedstock for their cattle. So they have to test every seed lot. They have to do a lot of testing, which is expensive and time consuming, just to guarantee that the feed they're giving their cattle isn't contaminated. So, I mean, up till now they've maintained that purity and that integrity, but they're under increasing amounts of pressure.
And organic food is more expensive.
Yes.
For now.
And so is surgery.
That's right. Pay now or pay later.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I like your comment, for now.
Yeah.
It may be that our food, because of I foresee with the GMO issue that we could have a real severe crisis in our food supply.
Our current food system is all predicated on cheap energy, and importing food from China in many cases is cheaper than growing something down in Linn County and selling it in Salem. So those lines are about to intersect soon, hopefully sooner rather than later. But yeah, right now in many cases it is more expensive, but that's because of the cost of energy and shipping is so cheap.
Let's kind of take a little turn here away from the GMOs, because we could, you know, it's a crisis, but what are you folks down in Benton County doing to counteract this, and how are you, describe in briefly, how are you beginning to take control of the situation and take control back to the local community?
Well, our group, Benton County Community Rights Coalition, formed about a year ago with an eye on passing countywide legislation that would, among other things, ban genetically modified organisms and the associated agriculture from our county. And we did that to protect our food system, which is a locally based food system that's growing every year. And we view it as our duty to do so, because we're all part of this food system. So we felt threatened by this form of agriculture coming in, and we wanted to do something about it. The reason we took the community rights tack is because we met at a talk by Paul Cienfuegos in March of 2012. And he presented us with an option for a type of activism that was new to us. This was not your standard activism, he said. This is a community rights-based approach. And what that means is that we're getting back to the basics of democracy, because what we have is not, we have a, like you said earlier, a crisis of democracy. The people aren't really able to decide in most cases now, things like as basic as what our food system will look like. So we wrote it with the community rights language, which elevates the rights of nature and the rights of citizens above the rights of corporations to decide what our food system would look like in this case. I mean, corporations have so many protections under the law, state and federal law, that enable them to attack an ordinance like ours if it didn't elevate our rights above theirs. There's two types of this type of work. We call one the straight up ban, for instance, and ours is a community rights-based approach. A straight up ban would just say, hey, we're going to get a majority of this county's population to say we want to ban GMOs from the county. And that's great, but you open yourself up to attack, legal attack by corporations, because they can invoke the Interstate Commerce Clause, the U.S. Constitution. They can invoke Dillon's rules, state preemption. There's so many tools in their toolkit that allow them to squash your ordinance.
Right. You can also say you're violating some of their basic Fifth Amendment rights or something like that.
Yeah, they have so many protections under the Constitution now that it really is flipped from how the Constitution was written, which says all power is inherent in the people, and governments and corporations are subordinate to that power. So we're really getting back to the basics of democracy by invoking the people's right to decide.
So they're taking we the people out of the toolbox and starting to use it.
That's right. So we're stepping outside the standard regulatory box, what CELDF calls the box of allowable activism, which basically means petitioning your legislators, one or two other tools, which ultimately may not be as effective because you're relying on other people to do this work for you. There's only so many letters you can write to a legislator. Ultimately, they have to decide. Well, we're bringing it back to letting the people decide and making it enforceable so that if it does pass, it'll have the teeth to survive legal challenges.
Super.
Okay.
Super.
Great.
Was it Thomas Lindsey was down there at the, what meeting, or was that
He went to the environmental law conference in Eugene and gave the keynote, and the next day he came to the Willamette Farm and Food Rights Summit, which was hosted by us, the Benton County Community Rights Coalition.
Okay.
And he spoke there as well, and he laid it out for everybody. He said, this is why this type of activism doesn't work. You have been shuffled into a very small area of things that you are allowed to do.
What do you mean by this kind of activism?
In the box, sort of playing the regulatory game activism.
You mean writing to your congressman activism? Okay.
Right. They've taken away our sort of choices.
I can hear that poet echo in my ear when you said, what kind of activism?
It is a dance, believe me.
It is a dance.
Yeah. So we're trying to step outside that box and say, this is our inherent right. We have an inalienable right to decide what our food system will look like. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be food system, but we're using that structure to protect what we hold most dear, which is our food system.
Okay.
So,
well, I have a little video clip that Thomas Lindsey explains some of that, and then for the benefit of our viewers, why don't we play that, and then let that fill in some of the gaps, and we can come back, and then you can further discuss how you folks are taking on his challenge down there in Benton County. So if we can go on with roll-in number 3.
On environmental law stuff, environmental law has been a failure. The statement I make at conferences, as I did yesterday, was that there's never been an environmental movement in this country. Because the environmental movement has been about raising consciousness about environmental issues, which is great. But it's been focused on a property-based vision of environmental protection. It's never questioned the fact that if you own a 10-acre parcel of land, that you should be able to destroy the ecosystems on that parcel of property just because you hold the deed for it. There's no recognition that ecosystems and the natural environment that they have their own independent existence. It's an indigenous value. We're not the white, we're not the white guys that tumbled over it and claimed it as ours. It's been an indigenous value for thousands of years. That nature is something separate. It can't be owned. It's not there for our exploitation. It needs a separate existence. And so beginning in the 70s, some white lawyers, including a law professor at USC and a South African lawyer that we've worked with over the past couple of years, started coming up with this rights of nature stuff, that it was almost like tough love for the human species. That you can't expect to put environmental regulation in place where we're self-regulating our use of property in the form of nature. That you actually have to put a structure of law in place in which nature itself has recognized as having certain rights that can be enforced against us when we actually interfere or violate those principles. The first Rights of Nature ordinance was born in a place called Tamacobura, a very conservative rural community in Pennsylvania. They came at it in a much more simple way, which they said, we have rights here, but that doesn't guarantee that we can stop this corporation from coming in. We need to strengthen our position by creating a new rights basis for the streams and rivers here, that we can step into the shoes of those rivers or ecosystems and actually defend them as ecosystems, rather than as our use of those ecosystems. Because generally environmental law has worked as end of the pipe. The damage is caused first, then you try to seek compensation, and compensation is triggered to your ownership and use of the property. So if you're a fisherman and you can't fish anymore, the judge gives you an award of damages equal to the 7 fish that you caught per week. It's all on your use value, your exploitation value of the ecosystem, not as the individual ecosystem itself. The work in Pennsylvania is spread to Ecuador. As part of my talk yesterday, we were brought in to help the Ecuadorians write a new national constitution. That national constitution is the first country's constitution to have rights of nature in it. And we just went through the first enforcement actions to actually enforce those laws. What it means is that the ecosystem, the mountain, the stream, whatever's being damaged, actually becomes the plaintiff. And this is where our brains kind of get turned upside down, because the rights holder is not us and our ability to use it. The rights holder is actually the ecosystem itself. So in Ecuador, that meant the first enforcement case is the Vilcabamba River in a small rural area farming community in Ecuador brought a case as the plaintiff. And folks there stepped into the shoes as a trustee of sorts to actually make that process work. And the judge ruled in favor of the river against a road construction company that was screwing up the river, the course of the river. So it's all brand new stuff. The other stuff people have some kind of handle on. Rights of nature stuff really just tends to blow the neurons right out at times. But it means changing how we do things, because our activism has been unsuccessful in terms of where we sit now versus where we were 40 years ago.
Okay, so how have you guys been blowing the neurons out down there?
Well, the reaction from the county was one of thinly veiled derision when they read our ordinance and started attacking us in motions and then in court. They said, so they want to give rights to dirt. Okay. And that just was something that they were totally unprepared for. But as Thomas said, we've been approaching this from a fundamentally flawed perspective. I mean, the earth doesn't belong to us. We belong to the earth. And putting that into an ordinance is shocking and novel to the powers that be. And we were laughed at in court. You know, they were having a laugh at our expense because we included that language.
This sounds like a real change in thinking. A really
yeah, this is totally out of the box. I mean, this is great.
And it's fine to talk about it, but to actually put it into law is something totally new. So that's what we need, though, to get us out of the hole we've dug ourselves. I mean, look where we are now. All these generations of this type of interaction with the world has gotten us to a place where our resources are dwindling.
The Indians were right all along.
So, it's true. I'm curious. Tell me about some of the people who were involved in this movement, like Dana and I guess Joe and so forth, and some of their stories and how you were working with them and so forth.
Well, we have a pretty broad group of people in there. I mean, Dana Allen, who's kind of the glue that holds our group together. She's a dynamo. She's the kind of person you definitely want on your steering committee if you're trying to do this type of work. She comes from a farming background. She's a baker, very involved in the community. Harry McCormick is also on the steering committee and is one of the co-petitioners. He's been an organic farmer for over 40 years. Co-founded Oregon Tilth, the organic certification company, the Corvallis Farmers Market, 10 Rivers Food Web. He's a big player in the local food movement in the valley. Joe Esker is also on our group. He comes from a government background, so he's sort of the one that when we start talking a little crazy, he brings us back to earth. He's like, all right, but these are the challenges we're facing that we have to, and the hoops we have to jump through. So we value his perspective. We've got Shepard Smith. He's a compost and soil scientist farmer. He's been doing that in the Philomath area for a number of years. So there's a pretty broad group of people in our group, and I think we all come from a perspective of that mindset that we are responsible to the earth and to the food system, and we're not here to exploit it. We're stewards. And so it's time to put our money where our mouth is and start thinking in terms of what can we actually do about this that will make this fly and not just be words. So
have you had any real successes as of yet?
Well, in that we wrote the ordinance and then sent it to the county and went to court to argue over whether it met the single subject requirement or not. Yes, we've had some success. We've learned a lot. We are now at the next stage. We're having to rewrite some of the language of the ordinance to address some of the concerns that were brought up in court. The county attorney did us a favor. He pointed out the holes in our ordinance, so we're fixing them now and we'll reapply. Our goal initially was, and this was kind of pie in the sky, was to get on the ballot for November of 2012. We knew voter turnout would be huge and we wanted to get on the ballot, but we didn't make it. Our ordinance still needed a lot of work. So then the goal was to get on the May ballot, but then we had the court issue come up and there was motions being filed back and forth and a lot of names were being called in the legal briefs. I mean, they compared us to domestic terrorists for wanting to assert the rights of the people. I mean, you know, how dare we? So that really got our dander up.
The terrorism.
Yeah.
Wow.
Domestic terrorists and
Wow.
sovereign citizen extremists.
Oh.
I ask you.
Wow, I like that. Sovereign citizen extremist.
Yeah.
Ah.
Dana wants a shirt made that says that.
So did this motivate you or invigorate you, or did it kind of
Yeah,
take
at first
you in
it ticked us off, and then yeah, it did. We said, "Wow, we must be doing something right." You know?
Yeah, to
So-
get that kind of opposition or
Right.
that kind of
Yeah.
expletives.
So it's become a
Yeah.
rallying point, a rallying cry for us.
Okay. Are you getting new people joining your cause?
Absolutely. We just, like I said a few minutes ago, hosted that summit, the Willamette Farm and Food Rights Summit, and what began as just Benton County doing the rights-based work has grown to now 4 counties. So we're trying to get this turned into a movement that's going to force people to take us seriously and take a look at this.
In 25 words or less, what would you say, or maybe a little more, but what would you say to a stiff-necked farmer to convince him that, to suggest that what you're doing is in his interest?
Well, I would ask him what kind of a world he wants to pass down to his kids and to his grandkids, and ask him, deep down, do you really believe that what you're doing right now is the best thing for you, your children, and your children's children? And if he can look me in the eye and tell me without blinking that he believes it is, well, then I've got a lot more work to do to convince him. But if you get a lot of people to ask themselves those serious questions, they realize that our system is broken. Well, it's working, but not for us. So we need to change the way that works if we're going to dig ourselves out of this hole and have a healthy food system and a healthy population.
And to a consumer who is not aware of these issues but does vote, what would you say?
I would say that food is everybody's business. I mean, we all eat at least 3 times a day, right? So knowing where your food comes from, how it's produced, is a critical part of being a responsible citizen now and moving forward. I mean, this is something that's getting really big now. People in greater numbers are saying, that's right, I am responsible for this. I'm not just a mouthpiece eating whatever comes at me. I need to take part in this as an active consumer instead of just being a receiver.
In Pennsylvania, which is where you were talking about, they're passing this, the rights of the rivers, etc. In Pennsylvania, they have a history of the Pennsylvania Dutch and the Amish who believed that the soil needed to be better for their children and for their children's children when they left it. And so they were organic gardening before there was such a thing as organic, right? And so what kind of a history do we have here in Oregon? I'm unfamiliar with the history of farming in Oregon. Do we have some kind of history like that which supports, and I mean in the European side of things, not, Chief Joseph or whomever, but so do we have some history?
Yeah, we're pretty lucky here. We have a hotbed of forward-thinking farmers and consumers, and not just natives, but people that have come from all over the country. And I know a number of young farmers that came to Oregon because they felt that was the best place for them to have the kind of farm that they dreamed of, that was part of this local food system where everybody was involved and everybody knew their farmers, and a lot of people want to be a part of that. So yeah, we are very lucky here that we have that group of people here. But I would say that this type of thinking and this type of farming, organic farming in particular, is not so much revolutionary as it is a throwback.
Yes.
Because before industrial farming became the norm, post-World War II, virtually everybody was organic farmers. They were forced to use methods like crop rotation and all these other organic methods that we use, because there were no pesticides and herbicides made by chemical companies that also were selling them patented seed. So this is, like I said, less a revolution than a throwback. But I'm proud to say that we have here the kind of population that can pull it off. And if we can pull it off here, then we can set a really good example for the rest of the country.
That's great. That's inspiring.
It is inspiring.
So Jim, you mentioned that you'd like to know, or you were talking about how can we identify GMO and non-GMO food in the supermarket?
Yeah. You know, I mean these pictures of these rats here. I mean this is pretty alarming stuff. I didn't really look at this before the show, and this is pretty startling. And this is stuff that we should be discussing, and we are on the show. But it should be. These discussions should be showing up in mainstream TV and mainstream newspapers if they are actually serving the people. And if they're serving the people, I think that I would like to know from you, I don't know if you know or not, but if someone is entering a grocery store and they want to buy food that would be, that they could feel safe would be good for their families, for their children, for themselves, you know, how would you suggest that they go about selecting?
A couple rules of thumb: buy organic whenever possible, buy local, go to your farmer's market. If you can't pronounce it, don't eat it.
Great.
You
hear that, Jeff? That stuff you put in your in your whatever it is, your creamer stuff. Yeah. This guy,
exactly.
He's the worst.
I know. I have a few bad habits, a few vices to work on.
So those are a couple big things. I mean, but getting to know your growers. I mean, going to your farmer's market, meeting the growers. I mean, that is an awesome way to get in touch with the food supply and how it's made. And everybody likes to go and meet the guy that grew your vegetables or grew the wheat that was milled into the flour that you're now eating. I mean, they love that stuff. Yeah. Connecting with where your food is produced is huge.
Yeah, I really like that. And you know, people take, and it's rightly so, they take their democratic responsibility seriously and go and vote, but then they think it stops there. It's every day. Every day you spend money is a vote.
The price of freedom is eternal vigilance.
Hey.
Yes.
Truly, truly.
So
yes,
I mean,
it is.
This is a perfect example. I mean, what would happen if we just kept going to the grocery store, buying our food, thinking, hey, I'm living a good, clean life here. Well, this is what's going on behind closed doors in the corridors of power. They're making decisions that aren't just affecting how we vote, they're affecting how we eat.
But when somebody is going to go buy something, where on that package do they look to find out if it's GMO or not?
Well, right now there's nowhere.
Nowhere?
We have no labeling requirements.
In the world?
In this country.
In this country?
Well, you said organic.
Well, that's one way.
Is one way.
That's one way.
Because if it's organic, it's not.
You're not allowed to use GMOs if you're going to maintain your organic certification.
Okay. But we're ahead of China, right?
That's right. China requires labeling. Russia requires labeling.
GMO labeling.
That's right.
We're not ahead of China. We're not ahead of Russia.
We're not ahead of Russia.
Not ahead of Russia.
How about
in this regard?
Europe?
Yeah, Europe requires labeling. Europe is leading. They're a bulwark in the anti-GMO movement. It's because of them that this is moving slower than it has.
So, are you familiar with the labeling proposition in California and why it went down?
37, and it failed by a very slim margin because all of the major food companies and biotech companies invested quite a bit of money to fight it. They started flooding the airwaves with attack ads that said, this is going to harm farmers. This is going to make farmers, it's going to increase our costs. This
Lose jobs.
It's going to increase the cost of food. It's all going to be on the consumer. Don't do this. You're doing yourselves a disservice. We know that's all, it's hogwash.
It's bunk.
Yeah, it's bunk, to say the least.
So how would the big agriculture producers and big ag, what would they lose?
What would they lose? They would lose the ability to pull the wool over people's eyes because overnight you'd probably see a vast movement away from GMO foods. They'd lose money in, hand over fist overnight, and they're terrified of that.
Yeah, this stuff needs to be discussed. This stuff really needs to be discussed openly. I mean, this stuff needs to be discussed in schools. It needs to be discussed in colleges. It needs to be discussed with your doctors. It needs to be discussed with your neighbors.
But bottom line, it should be on the news. We should have this information.
I should say too
rather than have it
that there are a number of labeling ordinances or laws coming up in a number of states. And we'll see how far they get with that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there's a number of states that are working on legislation.
Tell me a few that you can think of.
Washington, Oregon, Vermont.
Oh.
Honestly, I can't rattle off more than that.
Okay, well, that's good. That's good.
There's a fair few.
It's us, our neighbors, and and our friends
and
across
Bernie,
the
Bernie
across the-
Sanders.
If
Yeah.
California had been able to pass it, that would have been huge, because
Yes.
what happens in
Oh, yeah.
California filters down to the rest of the country.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
What
Um,
happened
And
in
there's
Cali-
so much food in California.
huge amounts of food grown
Right.
down there. So, but they'll keep trying, and I
Well,
support
we
them.
wish them luck, better luck next time.
That's
40
right.
seconds.
Yep.